Professor Joseph Ben-Jacquinen is an Egyptologist, having taught at Cornell University for over 15 years. Dr. Ben, as he is affectionately known, has lectured widely on both sides of the Atlantic. His theme, the ancient civilizations of Egypt. His presentations have placed him in great demand by students and community groups, especially those of African descent. Perhaps the high regard he enjoys today stems from his long, unwavering theme that the ancient civilizations along the Nile were African. In his many appearances on Like It Is, he has said so emphatically, time after time, in the face of most of the curriculums and the Cecil B. DeMilles of our day. This is why Like It Is came to Egypt with Dr. Ben, to have him show us what he's been saying to us for such a long time.
Egypt is the mother of the Western world civilization. It didn't start here. It started where Hinope said at the beginning of the Nile, but it reached its zenith here. The whole world must look to Egypt. The entire world, bar not a single country. Every high culture must come here for the beginning of what they are. I don't care if it's Jewish, if you're Christian, or you're Muslim, if you're Greek, or you're Roman. You must come here. Here is where it started, along the Nile, and here it reaches zenith. If you're talking about Abraham, you're talking about Moses, they were here. Moses, they said, was born here in a place called Goshen. Abraham came here and received his education. He had no education before he came here. All of them came here. The whole thing about the 10 Commandments came out of the 42 negative confessions.
Dr. Ben is teaching reverse racism.
They call it what they want. I don't mind what they call it. The fact is, if I teach it, come here and prove me wrong. I'll go anywhere they got and show them what they wrote, where it came from, and carry them to where it comes for them to see it. The point is, my evidence still exists. They can't show me Adam and Eve, but I could show them Osiris.
Five nations assigned their best engineers to move these temples to higher ground, to avoid them being engulfed by the rising waters from the newly constructed Aswan Dam. The monuments could not be moved intact, so they were painstakingly cut into smaller blocks and reassembled at this present location. The rescue effort cost a then estimated $36 million and was hailed as an engineering miracle. And rightly so. But what then does one say of those who originally created all of this, some 3,287 years ago? Breathtaking to behold.
You can't look at this and say, they weren't Africans who are doing this. Why would they put somebody else's face?
Well, it's an artistic rendering.
They didn't have equipment to make thin lips and to make narrow nose, so they had to use that, and it wouldn't make. But then the little details of a fingernail, they had the equipment for that, but not for the thin lips.
Is it important, though, to say that Africans did this?
Oh yes, if no one had said the Africans didn't do it, it wouldn't be important. But since that had been said for no reason at all, they wanted to satisfy themselves that although they were not in history, that they did it. Now, since it is that the people whose ancestors did it could not say anything about it in the past, now is the time that they declare to the world whose legacy it is.
There are 62 tombs here that are known of, perhaps the best known of which is the all but vacant tomb of Tutankhamun, best known because the boy pharaoh's tomb was discovered intact in the early 1900s. Egyptians working under an Englishman named Howard Carter came, quite by accident, upon a few steps leading downward, this in November of 1922. Carter was contacted and he ordered the digging to continue. They found the tomb of King Tut, a sensational find. The treasures of this tomb were brought out into daylight for the first time in thousands of years. Works of solid gold, alabaster, and other precious minerals, fashioned into exquisite works, intended not for the eyes of the living, but to accompany the young king on his journey to the afterlife.
I made a tiny breach in the upper left-hand corner. Widening the hole of the door, I appeared in. At first, I could see nothing. Details from the room slowly emerged from the mist. I was struck dumb with amazement, and when Lord Carnarvon inquired anxiously, "Can you see anything?" it was all I could do to get out the words, "Yes, wonderful things."
Inside lies splendor such as modern eyes have never seen. Yet something they sense is missing.
It dawned upon our bewildered brains that in all this medley of objects before us, there was no coffin, no trace of a mummy. I noticed for the first time that between the two black sentinel statues on the right, there was another sealed doorway. The explanation finally dawned upon us. We were but on the threshold of our discovery. What we saw was merely an antechamber. Behind the guarded door, there were to be other chambers, and in one of them, we should find the pharaoh lying.
Staggers them. An intact royal tomb. Intact but not untouched. Shortly after the royal funeral, robbers carried off boxes of gems and jeweled gifts. But what they left behind is overwhelming. King's chariots, gilded couches, previously glimpsed only in paintings on the walls of barren tombs. Egg-shaped boxes of meat and fowl to sustain Pharaoh on his journey. And touching memorial bouquets, placed moments before the doorways were sealed. The tomb is a cluster of small rooms. A hole leads to one Carter calls the annex. And it is the sealed vault between two guardian statues that burns in their minds.
We debated far into the night the possibilities of what might lie beyond it. Visions of chamber after chamber, each crowded with objects like the one we had seen, passed through our minds and left us gasping for breath. I think we slept but little that night.
In fact, they do not sleep at all. Secretly, they return to the tomb, desperate to learn if Pharaoh himself still lies beyond the sealed wall. What they find is breathtaking. The seals are intact. They now know that Pharaoh awaits them, shrouded within a wall of gold. The untouched clay seals of the ancient priests prove that the tomb robbers never desecrated the royal shrine. Ancient Egypt is about to speak its most sacred secrets. An immutable cosmic order in which Pharaoh is both man and God. At Pharaoh's death, the universe is in disarray. Egyptian religion demands that the proper rituals are performed, the incantations spoken, the mummy preserved. Only then can heaven and earth regain their stable rhythm. Hundreds of sovereigns make this divine passage, but only one endures to dazzle modern eyes, Tutankhamun. But before Pharaoh awakes, Carter will endure years of labor, heartbreak, tragedy, and triumph. In the winter of 1922, the discovery of the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun bursts upon the world. Crowds of reporters, tourists, and dignitaries invade the once silent Valley of the Kings. Suddenly, Howard Carter, a distant, solitary man, must contend with unending waves of the curious. Despite the mobs, Carter acts with extraordinary patience. He orders that every item in the tomb be meticulously catalogued and conserved. Lord Carnarvon predicts this will keep Carter busy for weeks. In fact, it will consume his life for the next 10 years. A team from New York's Metropolitan Museum is working nearby. Carter hires the museum's photographer, Harry Burton. Every item in the tomb is numbered and photographed by Burton exactly where it is found. Many of the objects in the tomb are heartbreakingly fragile. To conserve them, Carter turns to Arthur Mace, another expert from the Metropolitan Museum. Mace's daughter, Margaret Ord, is the only living eyewitness to this unique and thrilling period. She was 9 years old when her father first brought her to Egypt.
Well, the work was so exciting. Just Carter could rely on him. He knew always, not only to come in emergencies when there was something very difficult to get up out of the tomb, and he knew my father would always be there and help. It was always my father who was sent for.
The team's task is the most difficult in the history of Egyptology. Slowly, the forgotten pharaoh Tutankhamun reawakens. Objects from the tomb reveal a teenage monarch, attended by his queen, Ankhesenamun, probably his own half-sister. As the tomb reveals its secrets, the conservators find a tantalizing clue to Tutankhamun's youthfulness.
And I remember my mother saying to me, I've heard from Daddy that they found a child's glove, and I'm to go off to Harrods with one of your gloves that I think is much the same size, he said, because I want to find out the age of the king, if in fact he was a child king.
Tutankhamun was a mere child when he attained the throne, and just a teenager when he died. Half of the pharaoh's great wealth now belongs to Carnarvon. His triumph incenses Egyptian nationalists who believe Tutankhamun's treasures belong to Egypt. Carnarvon makes the situation even worse, selling exclusive rights to the story to the Times of London, infuriating competing newspapers.
The tomb is not his private property. He has not dug up the bones of his ancestors in the Welsh mountains. He has stumbled upon a pharaoh in the land of the Egyptians.
the nationalists, the tomb is not a treasure chest to be plundered. It is the consecrated sepulchre of a great ancestor. The thrill of the discovery has faded. Carter's patience begins to wear thin. Carnarvon treats the tomb like a tourist attraction, throwing picnics for wealthy friends. Carter is furious.
We have an opportunity in this tomb such as no archaeologists ever had before. But if we're able to take full advantage of it, it is absolutely essential that we be left to carry on the work without interruption.
Half science, half sideshow, the work proceeds. Carter and Carnarvon have told no one of their secret visit to the burial chamber. They've hastily covered up the evidence of their entry. And in February 1923, they stage a theatrical, formal opening of the chamber for a hand-picked audience of the elite. Block by block, the wall falls away. Behind it, another wall of gold. Within this sealed shrine, another barrier, another golden shrine. As Carter will discover, the second of four standing between him and the pharaoh. Next to the burial chamber, a treasury of ritual objects to ensure the sacred passage of the dead boy king. Guarding the entrance, Anubis, protector of the king. In this eerie room, another object of astonishing piety and grace.
Facing the doorway on the farther side stood the most beautiful monument I had ever seen. It is undoubtedly the canopic chest and contains the jars which play such an important part in the ritual of mummification.
Guarded by goddesses, the jars contain the king's internal organs. The walls of the burial chamber illuminate the voyage from death to divine rebirth. The dead king carried in a procession of mourners whose white headbands convey the purity of their grief. The Ankh is bestowed, symbol of eternal life. The blessing of the high priest named Ai, the man who will succeed Tutankhamun as ruler of Egypt. And finally, the boy king embraces Osiris, lord of the underworld. Pharaoh and God are one. 12 sacred baboons representing the hours of night that presage the sun's daily rebirth, echoed in the rebirth of the king. It is a magnificent discovery, but the ancient Egyptian religion warns all who dare defile the tomb of mighty Pharaoh.
He who shall injure my tomb, the sun god shall punish him. Any man who shall enter this tomb, I will pounce upon him as on a bird.
At this very moment, Howard Carter's canary is swallowed by a cobra, the sacred serpent, protector of the king. At the tomb, one journalist whispers, "I give Carnarvon 6 weeks to live." The legendary curse of Tutankhamun is born. The discovery of the intact tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh is an event of immense scientific importance, but the press focuses on the macabre myth of the mummy's curse.
Farce or coincidence? Scoff if you will, but one thing we know. In the dead king's crypt was this inscription: Death shall come with swift wings to him who toucheth the tomb of a pharaoh.
It is said that on the day of the official opening, Lord Carnarvon is bitten on the cheek by a mosquito. He nicks the bite while shaving. It becomes infected. And 6 weeks later, Carnarvon is dead. The official cause of death is pneumonia. But a superstitious world believes it knows what really killed Carnarvon: black magic from the mummy's tomb. Strange phenomena multiply. A power failure in Cairo at the hour of Carnarvon's demise. The sudden death of the nobleman's favorite dog at his English castle. And of course, the devouring of Howard Carter's pet canary. The myth of King Tut's curse will persist for decades.
None among the tourists who flocked to view the underground treasure house dreamed that of the 15 who opened it to the world, 12 would meet unnatural deaths within the short span of 10 years, most of them under mysteriously sinister circumstances.
The image of an angry mummy becomes a fixture of horror movies and books. While the gullible tell their ghost stories, Howard Carter fights desolation and gloom. He has lost his patron. Lady Evelyn leaves Egypt and soon marries the son of the chairman of Lloyd's of London. At the hour of his greatest discovery, Howard Carter finds himself alone. It takes a full year before he can undertake the most arduous task of all: the dismantling of the golden shrines in which Tutankhamun's mummy still lies. It is a time when Carter needs to concentrate undisturbed, but the crowds of the curious grow and grow. In the winter of 1923, Harry Burton and Arthur Mace resume their meticulous labors. Mace's daughter, Margaret Orr, often visited her father's laboratory that season.
This was a very beautiful disused tomb that they turned into a workshop, basically. All I remember, really, was my father saying that there should be better ways of looking after things, but all they could think of doing at that time was pouring melted wax on the things to keep them together, before they were moved. Because everything was so terribly fragile, and he showed me all this. And then he said, I think you'll like the chariots best, and I certainly did. The carving was absolutely lovely. Each side of the seat, there were these figures. Even I then could just stand looking at them, trying to pick out the different types of faces. And it just struck me as very romantic, this young boy king sitting in this beautiful, very golden chariot, roaring over the desert. That really captured my imagination.
Carter's team soon learns that Tutankhamun lies within a series of ornamented shrines. For 12 weeks, working in stifling conditions, they disassemble the royal mausoleum, until finally the doors of the fourth and last shrine are swung open.
We were to witness a spectacle as no other man in our times has been privileged to see. The decisive moment was at hand. The doors slowly swung open, and there, filling the entire area within, stood an immense yellow sarcophagus, intact with the lid still firmly fixed in its place, just as the pious hands had left it.
On the lid, Carter finds an inscription: "May he inside be uninjured, the son of Ra, Tutankhamun." On February 12, 1924, before another crowd of invited dignitaries, Carter is ready at last to remove the massive lid of the sarcophagus.
I gave the word. Amid silence, the huge slab, weighing over 1.25 tons, rose from its bed. The light shone into the sarcophagus. The contents were completely covered by fine linen shrouds. A gasp of wonderment escaped our lips, so gorgeous was the sight that met our eyes. A golden effigy of the young boy king, of most magnificent workmanship, filled the whole of the interior of the sarcophagus.
This should be his moment of supreme triumph. Instead, it is the beginning of a confrontation that will drive Howard Carter out of the Valley of the Kings. In Cairo, a new government of Egyptian nationalists sees Tutankhamun as the perfect symbol of Egyptian majesty and power. When Carter proposes that the wives of his colleagues, not a group of visiting Egyptian officials, should be the next to enter the tomb, the government denies permission. Carter is outraged. He padlocks the entranceway. Carter dictates a public letter to the Egyptian authorities.
Owing to the impossible restrictions and discourtesies of the Egyptians' Public Works Department, all my colleagues have refused to work any further upon their scientific investigations in the tomb.
The government gives Carter 48 hours to surrender the key. He refuses. Time runs out. The Egyptians make good on their threat. They send an armed force to his home.
The ministers were to go down and take the locks, break the locks, and take over the tomb. Carter was therefore on edge and must have said to my father, "Come with me, because I'm really feeling so depressed and sad about this. And I think it might be tonight." How extraordinary that the Egyptians decided they'd got to bring an army to take the locks away from one defenseless little man.
It is archaeology's first labor strike and Howard Carter's biggest mistake. He is to leave Egypt not knowing if he will ever gaze upon the face of Tutankhamun. Reluctantly, Carter agrees to a lecture tour of North America. The tour makes him wealthy and famous, but privately, Carter is confused and defeated.
On that outer lid was a tiny wreath of flowers. It pleases us to think the last farewell offering of the widowed girl queen to her husband. I shall retire renouncing any claims whatsoever to the Tutankhamun discovery, and also from future archaeological research, with a broken heart.
In art, in fashion, in music, and movies, King Tut is the boy of the hour. Tutmania is born. Carter returns to England in the summer of 1924. At the Wembley exhibition of the Empire's achievements, a full-sized recreation of Tutankhamun's tomb has been installed without Carter's knowledge or approval. Carter attempts to sue, but backs down. Tut's tomb is the hit of the fair. In the Valley of the Kings, the real tomb remains locked. Even the Egyptians concede that only Howard Carter is qualified to proceed with the unveiling of the king's sacred coffin and the mummy within. Pharaoh's sleep remains unbroken, but soon dramatic events will bring Carter back to Egypt. He will gaze upon the face of Tutankhamun. In eternal Egypt, death is the agent of renewal. Now, death brings renewal to Howard Carter. In November 1924, a terrorist bomb kills Sir Lee Stack, Britain's high-ranking official in Egypt. Britain retaliates by forcing the nationalist government to resign and installing a new government sympathetic to British interests. Carter returns to the valley in December. But the rules have changed. His future work will be supervised by Egyptian officials. As the work resumes in the Valley of the Kings, Howard Carter's moment of truth is at hand. Within the sarcophagus, the sheer magnificence of the artistry continues to astound Carter as coffin within coffin is revealed.
It was a moment as anxious as exciting. The lid came up fairly readily, revealing a second magnificent anthropoid coffin covered with a thin gossamer sheet. Underneath this covering, in places, glimpses could be obtained of rich, multicolored glass decoration encrusted upon the fine goldwork of the coffin. We could now gaze with admiring eyes upon the finest example of the ancient coffin maker's art ever yet seen. He presented a wonderful picture of majesty lying in state.
Ritual oils used by the priests to anoint Pharaoh's remains have turned as hard as rock. Even after they are melted away, the weight of the remaining coffin puzzles Carter until he discovers why.
The third coffin was made of solid gold. How great must have been the wealth buried with those ancient pharaohs. What riches that valley must have once concealed.
For 30 years, Howard Carter has dreamed of this moment. Inside the golden coffin, another unexpected treasure, and the most glorious of all, the golden mask adorning the mummy of Tutankhamun.
At such moments, the emotions evade verbal expression, complex and stirring as they are. 3,000 years and more had elapsed since men's eyes had gazed into that golden coffin. Time, measured by the brevity of human life, seemed to lose its common perspectives before a spectacle so vividly recalling the solemn religious rites of a vanished civilization.
More than 150 dazzling pieces of jewelry, almost all of them gold, placed on the king's body precisely as described in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
The youthful pharaoh was before us at last, an obscure and ephemeral ruler, ceasing to be the mere shadow of a name, had re-entered after more than 3,000 years the world of reality and history. At the touch of a sable brush, the last few fragments of decayed fabric fell away, revealing a serene and placid countenance, that of a young man. The face was refined and cultured, the features well formed. The tomb had yielded its secret. The message of the past had reached the present, in spite of the weight of time and the erosion of so many years.
For Howard Carter, only one question remains. Why did the boy king die so young? After unmasking his beloved Pharaoh Tutankhamun, Howard Carter wonders, how did the boy king die? In the great temple at Karnak, there is one statue whose face resembles the image on the golden mask of Tutankhamun. But the king's name has been replaced with that of his successor, stricken from life and death. And Carter suspects the young monarch was murdered. Murdered perhaps by the very priest who anointed him in his golden tomb. Recent X-rays reveal a small bone fragment within the king's skull, possible evidence of murder. Tutankhamun may have been the final casualty of his father Akhenaten's one-god revolution, killed by priests anxious to restore the old religion. For 7 more years, Howard Carter patiently studies and conserves the majestic contents of the tomb of Tutankhamun, preparing them for exhibition at the Great Cairo Museum, a collection that over the past 30 years has toured America, Europe, Russia, and Japan, captivating millions with the most dazzling artifacts of the ancient world. In 1932, the quest is complete. Carter remains in Egypt, retelling the tale of his great discovery to any tourist who will listen. In 1939, Carter dies, unhonored and forgotten in his own time.
Digging in Egypt by luck,
Yes.
by chance, like Howard Carter has been discovered, King Tut, by luck.
But sheer luck. As a matter of fact, it was Sheikh Abdul Rahman. His father was the one that found the tomb, and Howard Carter get the credit.
The credit, yes.
Is it true what they're saying, that Howard Carter turned out to be a grave robber himself?
All of
that
them.
He kept some of it for himself?
All of them kept for themselves. And they sold to museums, and they kept for themselves and they sold to museums. But they blamed the people who were equally robbing the tombs. But when they robbed the tombs, they didn't keep the monument, the artifacts to themselves. Somebody got it, and they don't have it, so somebody got it.
You went to the pyramids at Giza, and you were pretty much on your own, but you tried to join a group of students who were there with a professor from England. Is that true?
Yes.
Would you repeat that again?
There was a professor by the name of Goodenough, and he had, I think it was 6 or 7 students. In those days, there was no school for Egyptology. You either was in a school for architecture, religion, archaeology or so, any of those disciplines, and you came and studied with a field man, and you learn in the field. There were very few so-called textbooks in Egyptology. Egyptology was a thing which you did your apprenticeship with a person in the field.
What happened when you ran into this professor?
Well, when I went to saw the professor and saw what they were doing, it was right down the alley of what I wanted to do.
What were they doing?
They were digging, they were examining and looking at the reliefs in the various buildings. I asked to join in with them. And I was honestly told that they were sorry that they didn't take people of my color, and the exact words. And I said, well, there would be nothing wrong I was doing. I was willing to compromise, and I wouldn't get into their way. And he finally said, well, all right, you could stay and go around what we do, but you can't sleep along with us. You would have to sleep away from us.
Tell me some of the names that you were referred to as.
I was called Snow White.
By this professor?
By professor and the other students. At the time when they want to relate to me, they said Snow White or Black Boy. There were so many other names. Black Sambo, and they would come out and say it whenever they felt like it. Sometimes they would say African, and that's supposed to be an insulting word. To call me an African, I was supposed to feel bad, but that one I was very happy. When they called me African, I was happy that day.
Did you get into the Museum of Cairo at that time?
No, because the Museum of Cairo, they wouldn't let me go in there. You didn't go in the Museum of Cairo looking like me. You actually couldn't go in there looking like me.
Libraries? Did you go to a university?
They were not open to me.
So you were really on your own?
Yes, Egypt under the British at that time was no different than Georgia or Mississippi in the United States to a black person. I was here on my own, believe it, I had just married. The tradition, my father and mother pick out my wife. I had to marry by the culture. It was, I'm going to marry the girl, I marry her. She's pregnant, and my father said, look, you got to go, you don't have much time. We are going to take all the expenses for your wife, and we want you to come back before she delivers, so you must go. Because it's not going to be much more time. I want you to go before I die. He wasn't going to die, he was a young man. The possibility of dying was remote at that time. But he felt that he wanted me to see this because I had been always complaining of people saying that I came from a place where people eat people, that in Africa this, in Africa that the whole Nile Valley that I was boasting of was nothing. And so my father said, no, when you come back, you tell me who doesn't have civilization. Is it you or the European?
And all of this was devised in a place called Memphis.
Memnefa or Memphis.
Now, if we were to go to Memphis, what would we see today? Are there anything that's remnant of that period?
Very little. You would see some statues by Ramesses II, one at least about 40 feet, 30, 40 feet. Two in the yard, general yard, one of them having come to Tennessee when the Ramesses exhibit had come there, another one almost as large, and some other smaller statues. But the main buildings of the temple of god Ptah. Ptah was in the mythology the god who made gods, responsible for making gods.
The god of all gods.
The god of all gods. And you would see his, what's left of his temple, just sporadic pieces of foundation here and there. There isn't at least a quarter floor, or the height of a quarter floor, any place. This would have the triad. Like you have the Trinity.
Yes.
That's where the concept, ancient Egyptian, in every city had a holy triad, T-R-I-A-D, three gods. Normally a god, a goddess, and a god. A god, the father, a goddess, the mother, and a god, the son. The Holy Trinity that Christianity adopted. You notice this side. These are supposed to be the Asian captives of war of Ramesses II. You notice that? Mm-hmm. Carefully. Now let's shift side. These are supposed to be Nubians or generally Africans, but they're tied the exact same way as these on the side. Yet, in America, in the classroom, these are called Negro slaves of Ramesses. But these are called, in the same textbook, by the same professors, Asian captive or Semitic captives.
Prisoners of war.
No. Yes, prisoner of war here, but slaves there. Now, what made the difference?
Oh, gee, I can't possibly imagine.
All right, my brother.
Is this the full extent of the lights I can put on, or are there more lights?
Dr.
Digging in Egypt by luck, by chance, like Howard Carter has been discovered, King Tut by luck.
But sheer luck. As a matter of fact, it was Sheikh Abdul Rahman. His father was the one that found the tomb, and Howard Carter get the credit.
The credit, yeah.
Is it true what they're saying, that Howard Carter turned out to be a grave robber himself?
All of them.
That he kept some of it for himself?
All of them kept for themselves. And they sold to museums, and they kept for themselves, and they sold to museums. But they blamed the people who were equally robbing the tombs. But when they robbed the tombs, they didn't keep the monument, the artifacts to themselves. Somebody got it, and they don't have it, so somebody got it.
The three awesome pyramids stands the world-renowned Great Sphinx.
The Sphinx is supposedly the statue of the second the person who is buried in the second period, Khafra. But that is just one view. It is, however, a remaining part of the quarry that gave to the pyramids the stones that you saw cut there.
Oh, it's the leftovers.
The leftover. And out of that, the Sphinx has cut. It is the head of a pharaoh, or that pharaoh, the body of a lion.
Dr. Ben has often said that when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt and came upon the Sphinx, he ordered that its head be blown off. 21 rounds of cannon fire hit the Sphinx, defacing it. This, it's been said, is the origin of the 21-gun salute. There are many views on why Napoleon found the head of the Sphinx offensive. What do you think? Actually, the Sphinx is part of a complex of sites here, all having to do with the burial of the pharaoh. Alongside the Sphinx, you can see a temple. It's called a valley temple. There it is coming up on the lower left. This is where the funeral rites began. Inside that temple, Dr. Ben showed us columns which he said were made of the same granite once encasing the pyramids.
And this is what the whole face of all three pyramids was like.
This is all, but at the bottom. But to me, the feat is this. You fly from here to Aswan at least 1 hour, generally 1 hour and 15 minutes. Figure that they're coming down by river, no motor, to bring all this material here. They have to quarry it in Aswan and then bring it here. And they didn't finish there. They bring it, put it in place and finish it. People think that they do all the carving and everything at a place and bring it up, put it up. No, they put up the stone and did the carving after that. The pharaoh died, okay? He dies. They have to take him and wash him and do the rituals. Then the opening of the mouth ceremony, right? But they don't perform the rest of the performance. They must ritualize him in the Valley Temple.
The body of the pharaoh was taken up this causeway to the mortuary temple, where the mummification took place. Vital organs were removed and placed in special jars. So was the blood. A tedious process would preserve the corpse indefinitely if undisturbed. Then the pharaoh's mummy, with the jars and valuables, was interred deep inside the pyramid. How does one digest all the dimensions of this 4,000-year civilization that Dr. Ben has outlined for us? The answer is simple: you can't. That would require the kind of long study that Dr. Ben himself has engaged in. But there are some basic understandings for us all that can be useful to us in these times, as you will see and hear in our next and last edition. By the way, many years ago, a humble Egyptian village along the Nile named Daboud offered what little food and drink they had to Dr. Ben and his tour group that had become stranded because their bus broke down. Ever since then, Daboud has been part of Dr. Ben's tour. He always doubles whatever his tour group donates to Daboud. There is, in fact, an ongoing tug-of-war on the question, what did the ancient Egyptians look like? What color were they? Western culture has been more than a little fuzzy about this. In school, most of us learned about the pharaohs and the Sphinx, but not much about who built them. And with the face of the Sphinx blown almost away, it really wasn't clear, although I must admit that as a kid, I personally always wondered about that Sphinx's head.
New York studios with Dr. Ben. You know, Dr. Ben, you mentioned in an interview we did along the Nile that your father told you when you were a younger man that you needed to go to Egypt to see for yourself about your history. When you made that trip and you came back and saw your father, what did you say to him and what did he say to you?
First of all, what I said to my father was, I asked him a general apology for the way I had treated him with respect to what he was saying prior to my going there.
You were disbelieving.
Yes, you see, I grew up in Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands, primarily St. Croix and Puerto Rico. My mother being a Puerto Rican, a young girl that came to St. Croix. And what my father was saying to me, as against what I was learning in the school, was a contradiction. And I tend to go towards the school, the synagogue, and so forth. I had a little contradiction in my upbringing. I was going to the Catholic school because I was a private school for the first time, and then I went to the public school. After I was acceptable, I was not born there. And so I had to apologize to my father because I thought that Greece and Rome was it, and Judaism was the things. These three things was the most magnificent thing could happen to me.
So what did he say when you apologized to him?
He said to me, I knew what the result would be when you return.
Did he make a prediction about what you were facing in the years ahead?
Yes, my father knew that I was prone to engineering. I had studied in engineering. He knew that I owe him an obligation to study law. He knew some of my outlook from speaking with him in general.
But did he make any predictions?
Yes, he let me know. If you go through law, engineering, also you can be comfortable in an economic sense. If you go to the direction that you're thinking on now, using this to make people understand, to bring your people such as an African, I had been influenced by Garvey and Alviso Campo. These were my two heroes, Marcus Garvey and Don Alviso Campo. He said, you're going to pay a serious price. You may even wind up in jail. You may even get killed, because if you challenge the system with the new knowledge that you have, you're going to pay a big price.
All right, now speaking about knowledge, you mentioned that the 10 Commandments, when we were in Egypt, you mentioned that the 10 Commandments that we are aware of are derived from 42 commandments that carry another name, the negative confessions.
Or admonitions to Goddess Ma'at.
I see.
And they're thousands of years older than the so-called 10 Commandments. You see,
no, we have some visuals that are on the that you took on the wall. Let's there it is.
Yes,
those are the negative confessions.
Those are some of the 42 negative confessions.
Now, when you say negative confessions, that means
because they start in negative. Hail Ma'at, I have not killed man or woman. Hail Ma'at, I have not made light thy bushel. Hail Ma'at, I have not spoken ill of the God.
So these are...
These would be the English version
I have not, as opposed to thou shalt
not. Thou shalt not. It means that the order was issued already, thou shalt not. This is the response.
All right, now we've moved a little fast here, because now we're looking at a slide of the judgment.
The judgment
someone has passed on.
Wait, no, from left, my left-hand side, and your left, going right. There is Annie, that figure right there.
On the left?
On the left, extreme left. And Annie is coming towards the judgment scene. That is the scale there, and right between Annie and the next figure, there's a heart, you see there. That is symbolically the heart of the person.
In other words, the kneeling figure squats between the person's heart and a feather.
The heart is in front of him to the left. Behind him is the feather in a scale, an ostrich feather. The heart has to balance with the feather to prove that the man is speaking the truth. Now, the figure there is the god of the dead, Anubis or Ampu. Behind him, with the bird's head,
falcon's head.
No, that's
God of the scribes, is that?
Yes, right, Tahuti. It is not a falcon at this moment.
Ibis.
Ibis head. That is Tahuti. That's the god of writing, symbolically. He is taking down the record of... And the top are the judges. You have, isn't it? Look at what happened. You got 14 judges, 12 regular and 2 alternate. What the United States has copied.
I see. All right. Dr. Ben, we do need to take a break, and we'll come back for our very last segment. Please stay with us. this business about color, I raised it in one of the segments in this program. Is it important to worry about and argue about this issue of color and what color the Egyptians were?
Egyptians had no special color. They were Africans, light skin, dark skin, black, brown. You've got to understand that at the time of the early Egyptians, there were no Greeks yet, and there were no Romans. The Greeks and the Romans did not come until about 1000 BC. The Hebrews did not come in until the Egyptians were already in the 13th dynastic period. It was strictly an African culture.
So then, are we wrong in raising that issue now about color, and are you arguing against yourself actually when you say that color is an issue?
Color is an issue because it was made an issue by Western academicians and by the movies and others by showing this and making statements that the Africans had no play.
In other words, you'd never raise the argument if somebody didn't say otherwise.
Oh, sure, and I would not have even gone to Egypt hadn't the question been raised as to the Egyptians and myself having no part in this.
All right. Now, Daboud, this village that gave you and your tour group many years ago food and refreshments because you were stuck on the roadside in hot weather, I assume. What is your relationship with Daboud? You've adopted the village in a sense?
Yes, sir. We were passing and one of our buses broke down. Dr. Lewis was on that trip with his little daughter and his wife, 18 months old. We needed food. We didn't have none. We were going to be there for 3 hours. These people befriended us. The very little that they had nothing. They befriended us, shared everything with us, and from that day on, I adopted that village.
And in adopting them, you always bring your tour groups there and whatever contributions?
The tour group must stop there. It's always in my program. And whatever the group contribute, I double it. If the group give $10, I give 20. If they give 2,000, I give 4,000.
You're quite something, Dr. Ben. Thank you. Like It Is undertook this documentary for a number of reasons. Number one is to emphasize what should be obvious, that the unparalleled civilizations of ancient Egypt were of and by Africans. Also, it seems only right that all should see the evidence of what Africans had once achieved, perhaps providing some inspiration to today's viewers, especially those of African descent. What you don't know can hurt you. Dr. Ben was our choice because he is a long-distance runner in telling the story of Africa's Egypt. Finally, it is hoped that this series will play some small role in reconnecting African Americans with our ancestral home, much in the same joyous spirit of the mutual embrace between members of Dr. Ben's tour group and the people of the Egyptian village Dr. Ben has adopted called Daboud.